Rabban Bar Sauma, also known as Rabban Ṣawma or Rabban Çauma, was a Turkic, Chinese monk turned diplomat of the Nestorian Church of the East in China. He is known for embarking on a pilgrimage from Mongol-controlled China to Jerusalem with one of his students, Rabban Markos. Due to military unrest along the way, they never reached their destination, but instead spent many years in Mongol-controlled Baghdad. The younger Markos was eventually chosen as Patriarch of the Church of the East, and later suggested his teacher Rabban Bar Sauma be sent on another mission, as Mongol ambassador to Europe. The elderly monk met with many of the European monarchs, as well as the Pope, in attempts to arrange a Franco-Mongol alliance. The mission bore no fruit, but in his later years in Baghdad, Rabban Bar Sauma documented his lifetime of travel. His written account of his journeys is of unique interest to modern historians, as it gives a picture of medieval Europe at the close of the crusading period, painted by a keenly intelligent, broad-minded and statesman-like observer. His travels occurred prior to the return of Marco Polo to Europe, and his writings give a reverse viewpoint of the East looking to the West. Early life. Rabban Bar Sauma was born c. 1220 in a near modern-day Beijing, known then as Zhongdu Akan Balai. According to Gregory Bar Habraeus, he was of Turkic Uyghur origin. Chinese accounts describe his heritage as Wangu, a tribe of Turkic origin classified as part of the Mongol caste of the Yuan dynasty. The name Bar Sauma is Aramaic for son of fasting, though he was born to a wealthy family. He was a follower of the Nestorian faith, and became an ascetic monk around the age of 20 and then a religious teacher for decades. Pilgrimage to Jerusalem. In his middle age, Rabban Bar Sauma and one of his younger students, Rabban Markos, embarked on a journey from China to make a pilgrimage to the religious center of Jerusalem. They traveled by way of the former Tangut country, Khotan, Kashgar, Talas in the Siardayu Valley, Khorasan, Maraha and Mosul, arriving at Ani in Armenia. Warnings of danger on the routes to southern Syria turned them from the purpose, and they traveled to Mongol-controlled Persia, the Ilkhanate, where they were welcomed by the Patriarch of the Church of the East, Mardenari. The Patriarch requested the two monks to visit the court of the Mongol Ilkhanate ruler Abaka, in order to obtain confirmation letters for Mardenar's ordination as Patriarch in 1266. During the journey, Rabban Markos was declared a Nestorian bishop. The Patriarch then attempted to send the monks as messengers back to China, but military conflict along the route delayed the departure, and they remained in Baghdad. When the Patriarch died, Rabban Markos was elected as his replacement, Ma'yaballah in 1281. The two monks traveled to Maraha to have the selection confirmed by Abuha, but the Ilkhanate ruler died before their arrival, and was succeeded by his son, Arghun Khan. It was Arghun's desire to form a strategic Franco-Mongol alliance with the Christian Europeans against their common enemy, the Muslim Mamluks. A few years later, the new Patriarch, Ma'yaballah, suggested his former teacher Rabban Bar Sauma for the embassy, to meet with the Pope and the European monarchs. Ambassador to Europe. In 1287, the elderly Bar Sauma embarked on his journey to Europe, bearing gifts and letters from Arghun to the Byzantine Emperor, the Pope, and the European kings. He followed the embassy of another Nestorian, Isaac Elamchi, sent by Arghun to Pope Honorius IV, in 1285. Rabban Bar Sauma traveled with a large retinue of assistants, and 30 riding animals. Companions included the Church of the East Christian Sabardinus, Thomas de Infusis at Tommaso d'Anfossi, who helped as interpreter and was also a member of the famous Genoese banking company, and an Italian Italian interpreter named Uguitas or Ugato. Bar Sauma likely did not speak any European languages, though he was known to be fluent in Chinese, Turkish, and Persian. Europeans communicated to him in Persian. He traveled overland through Armenia to the Empire of Trebizond, through the Sultanate of Rum to the Samiso on the Black Sea, then by boat to Constantinople, where he had an audience with Andronicus II Palaiologos. Bar Sauma's writings give a particularly enthusiastic description of the beautiful Hagia Sophia. He next traveled to Italy, again journeying by ship. As the course took them past the island of Sicily, he witnessed and recorded the great eruption of Mount Etna on June 18, 1287. A few days after his arrival, he also witnessed a naval battle in the Bay of Sorrento on St. John's Day, June 24, 1287, during the conflict of the Sicilian Vespers. The battle was between the fleet of Charles II, who had welcomed him in his realm, and James II of Aragon, King of Sicily. According to Bar Sauma, James II was victorious, and his forces killed 12,000 men. He next traveled to Rome, but too late to meet Pope Honorius IV, who had recently died. So Bar Sauma instead engaged in negotiations with the cardinals, and visited St. Peter's Basilica. Bar Sauma next made stops in Tuscany and the Republic of Genoa on his way to Paris. He spent the winter of 1287 to 1288 in Genoa, a famous banking capital. In France, he spent 1 month with King Philip the Fair, who seemingly responded positively to the arrival of the Mongol embassy, gave him numerous presents, and sent one of his noblemen, Gobert de Helleville, to accompany Bar Sauma back to Mongol lands. Gobert de Helleville departed on February 2, 1288, with 2 clerks, Robert de Senlis and Guillaume de Brières, as well as Arboretier Auden de Bourges. They joined Bar Sauma when he later returned through Rome, and accompanied him back to Persia, in Gascony in southern France, which at the time was in English hands. Bar Sauma met King Edward I of England, probably in the capital of Bordeaux. Edward responded enthusiastically to the embassy, but ultimately proved unable to join a military alliance due to conflict at home, especially with the Welsh and the Scots. Upon returning to Rome, Bar Sauma was cordially received by the newly elected Pope Nicholas IV, who gave him communion on Palm Sunday, 1288, allowing him to celebrate his own Eucharist in the capital of Latin Christianity. Nicholas commissioned Bar Sauma to visit the Christians of the East, and entrusted to him a precious tiara to be presented to Marya Balaha. Bar Sauma then returned to Baghdad in 1288, carrying messages and many other gifts from the various European leaders. The delivered letters were in turn answered by Aragon in 1289, forwarded by the Genoese merchant Buscarello de Ghisolfi, a diplomatic agent for the Ilkhans. In the letter to Philip IV, Aragon mentions Bar Sauma. Under the power of the eternal sky, the message of the great king, Aragon, to the King of France, said, I have accepted the word that you forwarded by the messengers under Saima Sagura, saying that if the warriors of Ilkhan invade Egypt you would support them. We would also lend our support by going there at the end of the Tiger year's winter, worshipping the sky, and settle in Damascus in the early spring. If you send your warriors as promised and conquer Egypt, worshipping the sky, then I shall give you Jerusalem. If any of our warriors arrive later than arranged, all will be futile and no one will benefit. If you care to, please give me your impressions, and I would also be very willing to accept any samples of French opulence that you care to burden your messengers with. I send this to you by Michael and say, all will be known by the power of the sky and the greatness of kings. This letter was scribed on the 6th of the early summer in the year of the ox at Hodlon. The exchanges towards the formation of an alliance with the Europeans ultimately proved fruitless, and Aga Khan's attempts were eventually abandoned. However, Rabban Bar Sauma did succeed in making some important contacts which encouraged communication and trade between the East and West. Aside from King Philip's embassy to the Mongols, the papacy also sent missionaries such as Giovanni da Montecorvino to the Mongol court. Later years, after his embassy to Europe, Bar Sauma lived out the rest of his years in Baghdad. It was probably during this time that he wrote the account of his travels, which was published in English in 1928 as The Monks of Kublai Khan, Emperor of China, of the history of the life and travels of Rabban Ṣawma, envoy and plenipotentiary of the Mongol Khans to the kings of Europe. And Markos, who as Mahbh-Allah-III became Patriarch of the Church of the East in Asia, translated and edited by Sir E. Wallace Budge. The narrative is unique for its observations of medieval Europe during the end of the crusading period, through the eyes of an observant outsider from a culture thousands of miles away. Rabban Bar Sauma died in 1294, in Baghdad. Translations. Rabban Bar Sauma's travel narrative has been translated into English twice. Montgomery, James ed. History of Yabala III. Budge, E. A. Wallace, The Monks of Kublai Khan. Online.